Is Urban Gyms, your podcast, all over again. My name is Ken McGuire, joined in near us today. There he is, by Andy Murphy. And if we double click this fella right here, we're bringing Maverick Sabre into the fold for this month, and delighted to do it as well, and have the chats a Wexfordian as well. At least there's that kind of common ground between yourself and Andy. But we're going to have a chat about a few things. First off, Mav, it's very general. How are you? How are things?
Yeah.
How's life in Hackney?
Yeah, I'm all right. I'm not actually in Hackney, sadly enough, at the moment. I'm in North London, but further North London. Life's grand. It's lockdown. It's kind of, lockdown's taken an element of London out of London,
Yeah.
So it's kind of, I think you kind of have a balance living in a big city with sometimes it being mad and cold and lonely and fast paced, whatever you take from it. That's kind of balance with it being a city, and you can go out and it's constantly alive. It's got everything that inspires you and pulls you in. So then when that side's taken out, you're kind of left with the, oh yeah, it's lovely now. Yeah, so grand. Trying to keep inspired and still doing sessions and doing bits and pieces of work every now and then. And just keeping in the session world, at the moment, and keep creating, because obviously the live shows are calmed down. So yeah, it's just been about keeping my head stuck in and keep creating at a time like this and keep inspired, really, and it's been good.
Okay, well, before we got to here, you had to begin somewhere. So when or at what point in time did Michael Stafford become Maverick Sabre?
It sounds like I went into a bloody, like a phone box, and then turned into started putting suede boots on, tight jeans, and a bloody, I came out set with a microphone. No, I don't know. I suppose the kind of the simplest answer to that is probably when I, to anyone who remembers MySpace, I had to set up a MySpace page. I was 14. I was always writing from a young age, and yeah, I set up a MySpace page. I think it was 14, just maybe turned 15. And I needed to pick a name, because I was like, Michael Stafford doesn't really feel like it's got a ring to it. And I was spitting at the time, and you know what I mean? I was just like, doesn't really have a ring to it. So my initials being MS, I just found two words that, matched the way I was feeling at the time. Maverick, someone who puts on, someone who thinks outside the box. That's kind of what I felt like I was doing with my music. And Sabre, the meaning I found for it at the time was, someone who puts on a hard in front to get through hard times, and I just loved that sentiment. So it just stuck with me, and then that was it.
Wow. It's very.
Now people think my parents are French bloody Star Wars fans. Like, are you French? Yeah.
Yeah, we're from the Sabres, just outside Paris. Yeah, we've great crack at Christmas.
Yeah, exactly.
That seems very focused for somebody who's writing music at 14 at a time when you're probably just finding yourself, or you actually haven't got a clue what it is that you're doing and where your place is in the world. So how, at that age, right? You're in Wexford.
Mm-hmm.
You're starting to write. So I mean, where are you drawing inspiration from on the Wexford side of things, on the Irish side of things?
I suppose it was on the Wexford side, on the New Ross side of things. It was stuff, I was seeing around me and I was feeling around me. And I think, for me, music's always been about, I don't know, the variety of music that I've connected with over the years have been from various different backgrounds, various different countries, various different experiences. So for me, the kind of common thread in all that, growing up, my dad was, a big blues fan, also influenced by traditional Irish music. I was always influenced by that, and then got into my own love for soul music, hip hop, reggae, and the storytelling through that, jazz when I got into production. And for me, it was how did I bring that back into my own music and write stories about the everyday things that I see around me and feel, or my perspective on the world at 14, 15, but also make it universal enough that I can give someone the same experience that I had listening to their music, even though I wasn't living their experience. You know what I mean? For me, music was always about, more of a vocation of like, for me, the music I connected most with was, you know, like revolutionary music that changed my mind, made me think about things, even if it was as mundane as someone's daily living experience. Not mundane, but as kind of as common as that. For me, they were the things that struck a chord in me. And it was like, how do I tell them stories that can be kind of universally connected, but also reference back to just the everyday that you see around you? And I think there's pockets of that in every walk of life, you know what I mean? So for me, at 14, it was like finding that around me.
And when did you decide that this was going to be it for you? That music was where your heart was lying, or where your future was lying? Or was it a case where you kind of go, okay, well, I'll see what happens. I'll write some stuff. I'll release some stuff. I'll see what MySpace does for me. I have a mate who does something else, and then I accidentally found myself doing more stuff. Was there a plan? Was there a master plan in
No,
place?
I don't think there was ever a master plan. I think there was just like this, it was like this, I don't know, there was a subconscious drive, like I had subconscious blinkers on. And it was something, for me, it was just something else was more driving me all the time. So it wasn't even, I have, you know, and even still to now, which, you know, is part of a positive and a negative to me as a person. Sometimes I still have like a blurry vision of the path of the end result. And the path has always been like, all right, blinkers on. And I'm not sure which way this path is going to go, but here's my endpoint, or here's one of the endpoints. So I think for me at like 14, 15, I was like, I don't know if this is a career. I'm still affected in a sense at 14 by like, you need to go to uni to do anything. You need to do this, or you need to come out and get an apprenticeship at a young age, or whatever it may be. There was still elements of that in my mind, like, oh yeah, even if I don't do well in the leaving cert, you know, I can get a computer tech course and get into music that way. And there was still them roots for me. I was like, you know, conditioned in a sense to think that that was maybe another route of mine to get into music. But I don't know, there was something else driving me all the time, because at 15, I was finishing school and coming out and doing shows and going up at the weekends and staying up till 6 o'clock in the morning and making boom bap beats and spitting verses, and then going into school and sleeping for the first hour or so, the back of class. And so I had that kind of dedication from very young. And I was just like a subconscious belief that I don't know if I ever really sat and consciously thought about, like, you know, is there something else driving me here? It was probably from pretty young. It was just something that clicked in me, and I was like, I can't do anything else with my life. You know, that's the thing that I connected with most.
Was there an awareness in the school side of things? If you're coming in and sitting at the back of the class, like, did teachers, other lads in your class, do they know
Certain
what you're doing?
people knew, yeah, certain people knew. And I was selling CDs and stuff like that, so that was the old school days when we used to have to print CDs out, and I made my own covers, and so I was still selling CDs in school. So certain people knew, and then at the time, because the Irish hip hop scene was quite small, so I was kind of blessed to get pretty good opportunities when I was younger. So I was finishing school, still in school, and going up and like supporting G Unit or The Game, or and then staying in a hostel in Christchurch around the corner. And one of my friends would just come up on the bus, and I'm 15, 16. So to me, it was all magic at the time, but yeah.
And he is at that stage, are you still like coming back home, and then you've been there with G Unit or The Game, and then you have to turn around and hand your Irish homework in the following day?
Yeah, and I've made no money, and I've got nothing to show for it apart from my own pride and my own like, oh, I've done this, but there was nothing really physical to show for it apart from, I've come on and done a 10-minute slot up in the Olympia last night, and then I've got to go home and do me technical drawing work, or else I'll get screamed at on a Monday. You know what I mean? It's just like, yeah, but.
What was that like? I mean, early experiences on stage.
I think I combat it with kind of like aggression in my performance, because I was spitting and I was still a bit finding my own identity at the time. So I was like, I wanted to sound a bit like Dizzy Rascal, and that was my influence. It was like, or Kalashnikov or whatever was going on in the UK scene, but then still being very much involved in the Irish hip hop scene. I was still trying to find my identity in it. So for me, performance wise, was always like, yeah, it was strange, because that just gave me a little flashback. You'd go in and you'd have a CD, and you'd hope to God that it didn't get scratched on the way up, because you'd be mid-song and suddenly and you'd normally be keeping an eye on some fella who didn't give a I don't know if I can swear on this, but who didn't give a fuck, and he'd be just sat there like, who the fuck is this fella? And you'd be giving him a CD, and you just hope that he's into it to some level, to be like, oh, I'm gonna skip this, or I'm gonna help this kid out. So performance wise felt like, yeah, for me it was more about grabbing people's attention and how can I be different than the 10 lads that went on before me. And for me that was just like moving around and getting as much energy as possible and just being something different, you know what I mean? So I think that's kind of what early performances kind of transformed into.
Okay, Andy, you're doing a good bit of nodding there.
Oh, I'm just loving the energy. I'm like, we're just sat here. I'm like, I don't know. I'm not a musical guy, but I just like want to get up and start doing like, I don't know, burpees or grappling or wrestling. I'm just like, I just energized. You know, you can't feel that energy through the screen, man. Like John, you can hear that passion you have for music. It's been in you a long time, and I've always been passionate about health and fitness and wellness, and that's been my route. Right. But just listening to you talk, I'm just buzzing here.
And because you can understand then through that route, and you've probably had that route for a while, that you have as your moment of grabbing people's attention in what you're doing and what you want them to be doing, training wise, whatever.
Yes.
You've got your own path of how you've like maybe had a different had a different approach as you started to where you're at now, and it might have been more energetic or less, or you know what I mean?
Well, I think the similarities is that we often talk about this in the fitness industry and health and wellness, whatever, but every day is a performance for me as an instructor as well. You know, like people are feeding off my energy. You know, if you're coming into a gym class, whatever, and you're feeling a bit flat, a bit lethargic, it's on me to lift you. The same way, if, you know, I go back to 2012, and here's the story for you now, Mav. 2012, I just met the most beautiful lady in the world, let's just say, to me. And I bought a ticket to a certain gig in the Tower in Carlow, because I'm from Carlow.
Oh, yeah.
Now, this was a Heineken event, and they're only selling Heineken. So only selling pints of Heineken at this event. And it was actually...
I remember that show, because, yeah.
And it was actually to your gig, and it was awesome. And I had only started going out with Marina, and in October, and I brought her on her birthday. It was the 5th of December, I think, 2012, to your gig, and it was awesome. And again, you brought that energy. I think since then, now we've just been on this like upward trajectory, and so here I am now having a chat with yourself about
nice.
It's pretty awesome, like, you know. So
So yeah, you understand the energy that goes into it, because you have to do exactly the same thing in a different sense, but it's pretty much exactly the same thing. If you go in to the gym one day and you don't bring an energy to it, no matter how well you do technically, if you don't grab people, you could be technically better than the day before, but because you haven't grabbed people with your energy, it's a same with performance. It's like you can be technically brilliant, but for me, the live show, the difference in it was always, all right, but how do I do a step beyond? How do I make people feel like I feel when I'm listening to the message that I feel like I want to get across? You know what I mean?
Well, I always say, something I say with workouts, I'm saying for that night, I go back to 2012, but you'll never remember a workout a lot of the time, but you'll remember how you made someone feel. And maybe it might be the same for yourself. Like a lot of people might not remember certain songs, whatever, but they remember how you made them feel on a night, like, you know. And that's how I kind of operate. And I just go back to 2012. That night it's as clear as day, and that was there were good times. There were times when you could get out and be amongst people and be hugging people, and you know.
The old days when we used to socialize.
Yeah. It's very different now, but I'll hand you back to Ken here, because I'll talk all day now.
Tell us a little bit about the move from Wexford to London. So for you to go to London, you've obviously got a plan in mind at this stage. Something is drawing you there.
You'd like to think I had a plan in place. To be honest, my plan was, at the time, was just kind of pack my bags, and I was like, no, I'm ready to go now. And I kind of made the decision within about 2 weeks. There was a plan in place. What had happened was I'd met Plan B at a gig when I was 15 in Dublin. I supported him. And as we were doing back then, we would wait outside the dressing room of the artist maybe that we were supporting and start freestyling in groups, just in case they came out and be like, oh, let's do a verse. So there's a couple of us freestyling in the hallway. I think it was in the Village at the time. And Ben came out and was like, started talking to me. And he was saying, oh yeah, look, enter this vocal competition. It was a vocal competition online on MySpace. So loads of people entered. You do 2 different attempts over two of his beats from his album, I think it was. Do your own versions. And then he sits down with his team and picks the winner. And the winner wins a day in the studio in East London, where he's from. And I ended up winning it. And then I came over that summer. I just finished school. So I came over in maybe the end of July or whenever the end of the exams were. And at the time, I still kind of had a loose thing in my head, like maybe I'll do a computer tech course. I was just guessing really of what way I could get into maybe the production side. And I was like, maybe I'll come back and I'll do this and da 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 da. And when I came over and I had the session with him, at the end of the session, he was just like, "What are you doing?" No, he's like, "You're finished school. What are you doing?" And I was like, "Oh, do you know what? I might go home and, I'm going to continue to do the music. And that's my main thing, but I'm going to try and get a degree and da 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 da. And it's going to be a long route because I didn't really get many I did all right in my leaving cert, but I didn't do fantastic. So I was like, oh, it's going to be a longer route." And he was like, and this isn't bloody cliche, but this is actually what he said to me. He was like, "Yeah, don't have a backup plan. Basically, don't have a plan B." I know that's fucking, oh yeah, he said that was that he was like, and he's a pretty serious, when he's talking about music and whatever, he's like very straight to the point. And he said to me, "Look, I'll be honest with you, if you have a backup plan now, your music will be something you do on a Friday night, on a Saturday night, on a Sunday morning after you've come home from work and you've done the Saturday night out and it's a little hobby." He was like, "You can go down that route." He was like, "Or you can just make a leap of faith and make it your main thing now." He was like, "You've got no attachments. What are you doing?" And I was like, yeah. So I went home. I let that like sit over my mind. And by the time I got back to New Ross, I was like, nah, that's it. So when I came back in maybe the August. I was only over for a couple of weeks. And then I just decided, I was like, right, I'm going to work for a bit, save up some cash and then come back. And then so I worked for a couple of months, saved up a bit of cash, and then I was like, right, I'm ready. I wasn't ready, but I was like, I packed my bag, I booked my bloody boat and train. I had nowhere to stay, and luckily my aunt was like, I think like a week before I left, she was like, you can stay at mine. I was like, all right, thank God, because I was just gonna go over like, yeah, no, no one needs to worry, and that was my kind of vibe at the time. So it was more pride than anything, and I was like, yeah. And then just made the decision and came over. That was it. Literally with a bag on the boat.
So where do you start from there? You've got a roof over your head, and now you're like, well, I've given up on the plan B side of things. I have a few quid in the back pocket, but I need to go make a music. Where's your first port of call?
My first port of call was sessions. Was like going into, at the time, the studio that I was using was a studio in Kensal Green in West London. It was Ben's studio at the time. And he basically said, look, you can come in after hours after I do my sessions and use the studio and use the setup. And that's what I did. So I'd get on the train from Greenford, I was staying at the time, and I'd travel half an hour, 20 minutes in. And I would sit and with a couple of friends and wait for a session to be finished. And then I'd go in and start working on tunes, And that was it. That was just that was the graft. It was like late nights with bloody cherry brandy and bloody whatever else I'd get my hands on. And I was just sitting there and I was making songs. Yeah, making songs. And then it was I was around a lot of creatives at the time. I was around, Plan B and his team, all from Forest Gate in East London. They were all creative. Some were DJs, some were spitters, some were singers. And then I was around another group called People's Army from South London, who are like some hip hop heads, conscious, and they kind of were teaching me a lot and bringing me to a lot of shows. And I was around that environment, and I was around Ben and his environment. And it was just like, it was for me, it was about soaking as much in at the time and building, a family and also trying to like better myself and create. So it was just like wherever I could get a studio session, I'd take a studio session. If that meant I'd need to stay up all night and get 2 hours in a studio at 4 o'clock in the morning, I'd do it, So it was just kind of that. It was a real like head down grafting time.
And how long between there and your first release? So before the albums start coming along, but
yeah. So at the time I was releasing little bits and pieces. And I think what was the first proper release was probably I'd say it was Sometimes. It was a song called Sometimes, which was a song that I'd self-produced and I'd had since I've been I'd had for like 2-3 years at that point. And I think I was 18. And and again, was just grafting. Ben put me in contact with a guy who had just started working at MTV and had seen I'd cut up some old VHS home videos for a rough idea when I was about 16 and I first made the tune. Sent it to this guy who just started working at MTV, a young camera guy, and he ended up turning it into, we went and shot with him for a day in Clissold Park, and he ended up merging the new footage and the old, turned it into a video, and we released it independently. And that was the days of Channel U, where you could go home and, you know, they're actually bringing that back now, Channel AKA, where you can go home and you can text in, and, you know, the more text people get, the more the song will come up. So, and that Channel U was kind of one of my sources from getting everything from the UK. When I was a kid, I used to come straight home. This is when the dial-up internet days were, and you just sit and I'd watch it for hours to get new music. So for me, when I got that, and my video came on independently through that, and it ended up doing really well on the channel, and it ended up kind of like, yeah, winning over my early fan base. And yeah, that's where it started from sometimes. And it was literally me at home, probably texting in a million times myself. Or, not probably, definitely. And, yeah, get everyone texting.
100%, yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, and that's where it started. And it was kind of like that pure joy of being at home, like, oh my God, that's my fucking face on the TV again. And I was just, yeah, that was the first release sometimes. Sorry.
How did that sit with you?
How did it sit with me? Again, it was like, I don't know. It's like there was blind blinkers on not blind. There was subconscious blinkers on in the background. That there was something in me that didn't even think about it. To be honest with you, at the time, it was more like, yeah, it was more like moving forward and constantly creating, and to be honest, I probably learned to second guess myself more as I gotten older. As we get older, and we start to analyze things more. There was more of a fearless element there that I was just like, fuck it, that's me moving forward. I never really thought about anything. I was mad excited, but it never kind of, yeah, it never took me away from the path that I was going on. I was never like, oh, that's great now, and yeah, I'm happy with that. It was always like, all right, next thing, and next thing. Yeah, that's just kind of how it moved on.
Because it's not a far, like, to get there and then to kind of, you know, sit down and watch yourself and watch your face popping up on TV and watching videos coming in and building a fan base. It's still not a far throw from having just finished the exams and jumped out in Ross and come into the UK and go, sure, I was only doing that there last Tuesday, and now I'm here. This is class.
Yeah. So yeah, it's weird how quickly things, especially in that era, I don't, you know, even now it's quicker how art is kind of come through. But in that era, to be at that stage and then suddenly to be on TV was a mad concept for me. You know what I mean? After sitting and looking at MySpace for bloody 4 years, like, oh, there's another 200 plays. Oh, fantastic! That's great. You know what I mean? And being happy enough with that. You know. So.
Yeah.
So you go forward, kind of maybe. I'm not sure where we are in the timeline. Maybe two or 3 years, and then the debut album comes out.
Yeah.
So what was that experience like? This is I'd often find it, like, chatting to musicians, like there's a whole process you go for the album, and then there's like I've spoken to guys over the years who go, yeah, this is my album, it's coming out now on Tuesday. Actually, Ken, no, do you know what, it's coming out, I'm just going to push it out to August there. I think I'll be happy with it now at Christmas time. Sure, we might have a look. I'm still kind of working, I'm still kind of tweaking things. At what point did you decide, or were you guided from a label point of view, or from the people that were around you, that you're going, okay, I'm here, I've made my mark, I've built up a fan base, now I need an album. And it's a big thing, releasing an album.
Yeah, do you know what it was? It was kind of a 2-year plan, to be honest, because I signed just before I turned 20, or just when I turned just after I turned 19. I signed between 19 and 20 to Universal. And from there, we built up. I'd already done 2 tours. I'd already been on the road quite a lot. I'd already traveled with the music enough independently that when we came in, there was already a fan base there to a certain degree. And it was more of the first 2-3, I think it was like, was it 2 years? The first 2 years were about building into the album. So I did a couple of features that did quite well, a couple of dance features like Chasing Status, that was on their second album. That album did quite well. And then the Professor Green song with Jungle, there's a couple other dance features that I did. And at the same time, I'd released a mixtape called the Traveling Man mixtape, which had a selection like 14 tunes on it. Had loads of different features, MCs at the time like Rich 32, Maxter, a couple of different people on it. So we released a mixtape, which I ended up going on a tour, my first kind of like solo tour with. Then we released a 4-track EP, I think maybe 6 months after that, called the Lost Words EP. And then we built ourselves up enough that we felt like, all right, this is time to start drip feeding stuff into the album. Because I wanted to slowly merge people into the world of where that first album was, which was a blend of everything that I was inspired by anyway. But I'd come from kind of like so many different places. I was a boom bap head, I was an MC, and then I kind of came into, you know, people hearing me from Chasing Status Records, touring with them, to them being on Jungle with Pro Green and loads of other kind of stuff where I was more going to my jazzier side or soul side. And it was kind of like a melting pot. So it was about almost planning a route of my releases about how do I get people to that first album and the sound I want on that. So yeah, it was more of a plan in place rather than a time like, oh, I need to release an album now. It was kind of building into it, because then we got to a place where the record was made. And I was kind of bullheaded at the time, to be honest, still am now, but at the time I knew what I wanted to make. I knew what I didn't want to make. I knew what I wanted to say. You know, there was definitely certain disagreements, most definitely with the label at the time. But, you know, every song that I made, I wanted to make, and every song that I put out, I wanted to put out. So yeah, it was more of a, how do you place this? It's like, what comes first? You can't drop I Need, for example, off the first album too early, because you need to build into it. Everything needs to have its own particular moment. You know what I mean? So yeah, it was more about kind of having the songs in place, being like, right, there's the album, came together fairly easy. This is my main thing was, I need to make this my solid first stamp ever on music. It's my first record. I've got 21 years of songwriting, of ideas, of emotions, of views on the world, of stories to put into this. I need to make sure this is the first stamp, that no matter what goes on from here, that this is what people know me for, you know, moving forward. And it was more about building that and getting that right. And then we started releasing singles, you know, to build into it.
Does it bring a lot of pressure on you? Or did it?
Yeah, nah, it did. You know, at the time, you know, there was moments that I struggled to sleep. You know, there was definitely times that I struggled to sleep. During that first album period, you know, that a lot was on my mind. Yeah, because you know, it was a different world to me, and I was never really kind of an industry type of individual. You know what I mean? That was never the side that really attracted me. So from being kind of, you know, being on an underground hip hop scene and that being my circle to a certain extent, and then coming into that world, there was, you know, various different pressures, but then also at the same time, there was a pressure on myself to always remain the same and to make sure that the art was at the front. So it was probably more the pressure I put on myself to, you know, balance that world of like, yeah, you're signed to a major record label and you're in the back of Addison Lee's and there's champagne and parties and you're being invited to all these. And I'm, you know, I was a bit wild at the time. So it was like a balance of, yeah, of that, and then keep maintaining like, nah, but you know, for me, music's a vocation and it's more than all this. It was you know, what I wanted to do with my music was always more than anything that surrounded it. So yeah, that was more of the pressure. But there was definitely, you know, naturally in them environments, there was pressures, you know.
Okay. Andy, you probably saw similar in terms of you know, fight stuff. You get in, there's you know, whether it's your first fight or your first big pro contract or whatever, there's, you know, situations where you got to go out and you got to make your mark. You're looking to kind of push on from somewhere or start from somewhere. You see similarities in there?
Yeah, again, it's mad, like the crossover in music and sport and leisure and that. But one thing I've just really tuned in to listen to Mav is, like, he's put himself in positions over a long period of time, like networking with such amazing people to bring you to where you are. Obviously, you have your own skill set as well that you bring to the table, but you talk about plan B and there not being a plan B. I think I talked about this on one of my previous podcasts about when I opened Urban Gym, and my previous manager said to me, he's wished me all the luck. He always said I should have my own gym. I never really believed in myself enough to be, oh, I can run my own gym, whatever. But I remember it just got to a point where Richard Shannon, our sports psychologist, asked me, what would I do if I wasn't afraid? And well, opening a gym is what I would do. So I just did it. I bit the bullet and did it. But I remember John saying to me, I said this before, it was like, you know, hey, sure, look, Andy, if it doesn't work out, there's always a place here for you. And I remember saying to John, I said, look, I need you to take away that statement, because if I know there's always that place, that safety net there, then I'm just going to creep back to it when things get a little bit hard here. And it's the same with the MMA situation too, Ken. You know, with traveling to different gyms to train and train with better people and that as well. You start to take away the ego element and kind of just go into these places and just absorb knowledge. For me, it's a bit different going to an MMA facility where I know I'm going to get hit in the face quite a bit. I'm going to get buried, I'm going to get under a lot of pressure. But that's where we grow. And listen to Mav there in, you know, taking that scary trip going over to London and, you know, living with his nanny, like, you know, like that it's a big jump. But like I said, when there's no plan B, you make it work. And look where you are now. You know, you're on your podcast, Mav.
Yeah. But you're right. Exactly. That's exactly the same thing. Like you said to your boss before, like, don't give me that option, because no matter how driven we are, sometimes if we have them, they are little crutches that naturally we're going to fall back on. We don't want to be scared and like in this vulnerable world where you're like, oh shit, I've just started up a gym, bollocks, now it's all down to me. It's like, but that's the stuff that makes you go harder, because you're like, all right, this is only down to me now, so you've got to go hard to make things work.
How do I make it work? And I always say, like, we have all the tools, you know, we just have to use them to get wherever we want to go, but we do need to have a vision. I know you said about having a murky vision, but you knew there was something there. The same way for myself, and it may change over time, but we adapt to it as well. And I guess now you're seeing people like yourself being so creative during COVID as well. And I do believe like the cream rises to the top, and you can see so many artists like yourself stepping outside our comfort zone again. I see you creating more content again. That voice is incredible, by the way. And then it's the same for ourselves. A lot of gyms in our industry where, you know, a lot of them have to get outside of their comfort zone, put themselves out there a little bit more. Don't be afraid to be judged. You know, there's a thing in the fight game we often said, and it helped me a lot with the gym now. It's like there's only one thing worse than being talked about in our industry, and that's not being talked about. So don't be afraid to put yourself out there. You know?
No, of course, and that's where, especially right now, where you're right, you have to kind of like break your own boundaries. You know, still keep within your principles of who you are and whatever. But yeah, there is that element now where it comes down to it, and I can imagine, you know, it's the same for you as it is in music. It's like, right, the environment's changed massively, so you either adapt and try and bring your uniqueness through in a new way, or you kind of, you know, we sit back.
With an idea that environments have changed, around the notion that environments have changed. Environment and the lay of the land and the music side of things and distribution side of things, labels, gigs, everything else change in those intervening years. So you get the first album out, you go on to album number two, you had Inner Standing out there. You had When I Wake Up last year. That was last year's release.
2019.
Early last year. So what was the change for you? I know that there's a lot of ground in there, but how did you see your change, your music change, your approach to music change? From the first album out to the last one, at least.
Yeah, I think the biggest change was probably, well, there were both big changes between each record, but the biggest change was probably between the first and the second record. You know, I was 21 when I released the first record. I was 25 when I released the second. In between that, just on a business level within the label, everything had changed. So Mercury, who I was with at the time, had merged into EMI. All my A&Rs left that had signed me, that they're the people that bring you in and like back you and believe in you. And so they'd left. The team had changed around. There was like 5 artists in rotation in the label on my first record, and then that went to like 28 for the second record. The boss had changed. I think he'd gone to Rock Nation or whatever like that. So a new boss had come in, and it was a different playing field for me. I was in a different headspace, and I'd kind of been through not a great period before I put the second record out, and I've kind of a lot had changed at one time really for me. So I was more of I was a different person coming on the second record, and it was a different environment, and it kind of like it just felt a strange environment for me on the second record. And it was a changing point, you know what I mean? But
Do you feel like you're kind of proving yourself all over again, or?
100%, there was an element of that, because I was basically in a space where I had to, I had to put music out through people and to convince them. It's like, a team. The big thing about, for me, music, and what I would advise for any young musicians, is build your team. Always have your set team. If it's in a label, make sure you've got a team within there. If some members of that go, you've got to have something in your contract that goes, well, if my team breaks, I've got to be out, because it's very much about, as is within anything, you've got to have people believe in it. And not everyone is going to believe in it, or not everyone's going to understand the vision. So when it had that changeover and a lot of people left, and I was in a new environment, and, I'd changed management at the time, and I'd gone with a kind of a bigger management company due to problems with my first manager. It's basically everything had changed within album 1 and album 2, and it wasn't the best environment for me in album 2. And kind of when I came out at the back end of that, and it was like the start of 2016, I just realized that nothing was right. Nothing was right anymore. And I'd put so much into the second album. I'd even ended up putting on my own cash into the second album to finish it off. And I just felt like, yeah, this isn't connecting. It's not connecting in the way I wanted to. Moments were in their own right, but as an album, for what I put into it, I felt like it would do. It didn't do that. And then the team didn't feel right around me. The management definitely didn't feel right, and it kind of felt like I was a bit by myself in everything, And I was sat with bloody albums worth of music on my computer, not feeling like the label understood the journey, and not feeling like my management were willing at the time, and that they had their own complications internally. And it was a mad period for about 2 years where it felt like everything was changing. And then start of 2016, I went on the road in Australia. I'd done 2 tunes for a group called the Hilltop Hoods. And that album went #1 in Australia. So they brought me out on like an arena tour for two months or something like that. And I went out on that, and then came back. And when I came back, I just had a bit of to be honest, when I came back, not to go too into the story or anything, but when I came back, I got kicked out of my flat for noise complaints. Yeah, I know, I was young and just stupid, but ended up getting kicked out of my flat for noise complaints. And I was basically, I'd come back off tour for like this amazing arena tour, and I was sleeping on my sister's couch. And I woke up and I was like, yeah, none of this works for me anymore. Like the management, the label, I needed to clear my head. I needed a new start. So I just went in, and basically within like 2 days, I'd left my label. They'd agreed, because they were like, yeah, this isn't working out for us. It's not. And I said, I'd gone in and I was like, this isn't working out for me anymore. I could sit here for 4 years on the shelf and you wait for something to click, and then I'm stuck and I can't make any money and I can't put any music, or I can just leave now. And then I said the same thing to me management, and I was, and then I was back to my sister's couch, and I was like, fucking hell, I'm on my sister's couch. I've just put out my second album. I've got no management, no label. I was like, bloody hell. But I felt ridiculously free, because I've been in such a space of over the second album process. I was like, why isn't it connecting? Does the team not feel like they are connected to it and they're not pushing it or spending on it in the right way? And there was loads of things that I kind of modeled my head at the time and made me kind of become really disconnected. And then that was the kind of journey of finding myself into When I Wake Up. So from the start of 2016, that's when I was like, shit, right. Where's my team of people around me? Where's my mindset? I wasn't the young, paranoid, angry kid anymore that was on the first album. And I wasn't this kind of like too into my own critique in myself that I was on the second. And I moved into this space where I was like, fuck it. I need to build a team around me of people that I trust. From directors to producers to writers, and I already had them. They were already my friends, but I didn't realize that was like moving forward. That's the team that I need as a structure. That I was relying on major labels to be like, oh, I need a director for this, or can you email that producer and put me in? It was like, no, I've got all these relationships with people, so I need to build that. And then that was the building process into When I Wake Up, the 3-year period, I suppose.
Knowing that we're kind of coming close on time, I was listening to you in the car on the way over. I was in the station early this morning. Said, "Grand, I'll throw When I Wake Up on in the Jeep on the drive home," and having heard what we've spoken about, where you moved to, you moved from New Ross back to the UK. You're looking at MySpace and you're going, "Oh, cool, man! I got another 200 plays. This is great." And then I flick through Spotify and I'm like, "Oh, okay. Well, there's the Georgia number there. There's about 73 million plays on that. There's about 3-4 million people that are listening to your stuff every month, and this is just on one platform.
Yeah,
How,
yeah.
how do those kind of how do those kind of numbers sit with you, knowing that the stuff that you've penned, the stuff that you've put your time in and your heart into and your life into and your own cash into and everything that we've just spoken about, knowing that, cool, it's like, all of these people have bought into me and all of these people have bought into my music.
Yeah.
How does that sit with you personally, like?
I don't know. There's like it just feels like connected. There's a proudness to that. You know what I mean? And I think even specifically talking about like some of the records on When I Wake Up, when I see them connecting, there was moments in that specific record that I remember playing stuff to people and then being like, "What the hell is this?" It's like me all like, and I'm sitting and all mad, my own production. That's me being When I Wake Up was my freest record I've ever made. It was like the purest. Everything else was pure, but this was really like, what? I'm just going to experiment and find a different pocket of myself on this. And when that connected in a way, and really like that did far better than my second record, and kind of, on feedback wise and numbers wise and stuff like that, it was the closest thing to my first. So for me, it was like just a real proud element of seeing how songs can connect in your own journey, believing in the waves of your own journey, if that makes sense. So it was more of like kind of a humbling thing, to be honest, when I see stuff like that. Because even like, for example, the journey of a song like Slow Down with Georgia, ended up getting a message from a producer called Slow Motion. He's a Brazilian producer. And he was like, this was a year and a half ago. He was like, or whenever Slow Down came out, a year ago. And he messaged me, he was like, "Yo, I've done a remix, this kind of underground house remix. Da, 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 da." And I had to listen to it and I was like, "Oh yeah, this is nice. This is nice." It's different than the original, but I was like, "Yeah, this is nice." I always knew people would pick up on the verse melody of that because I felt like it was always the strongest. And then I started getting these videos of massive festivals in South America playing this tune. I was like, "Yeah, this is mad." And the Slow Down by itself was already doing pretty, the original was already, numbers wise and stream wise, was already doing pretty well. And then there was Drifting and Into Nirvana that I was doing pretty well streaming wise as well off the record. And so I was already mad content with that. I was like, that's success to me from going my first independent record. I was like, sweet, all right, let's move forward. And then, yeah, that just took a life of its own, and it ended up being, I think, like the most played record in Brazil on the radio this year. Did fucking 200,000 copies in Brazil and streamed 74 million times and lives in this world of its own. And it was more of like, when I see stuff like that, I don't know, for me, it's more about, look how music travels and look how songs travel and have a life of their own, and they can connect with people in a space that you have no control over. So it's just more of like a thing of, don't think too much. Make the music, make sure you put as much into your art as possible. And this is how things can connect in their own journey. And this, you might put a song out and it might connect in 10 years, or you might put a song out and it might connect tomorrow. But these are the possibilities of where your music can go. So for me, it was more of like, all right, sweet. Subconscious blinkers back on, sweet. That was it more, you know what I mean?
Before we let you go, 2020 has obviously been a bananas year. I'd imagine there would have been a lot of activity or promo off the last album that was planned through this year, and in terms of tours and gigs and travel. What are you kind of hoping for 2021, or what comes next for Maverick Sabre?
More music. I've got the rough skeletons of the fourth album. I've got just heaps of music. I've got you know, an idea of a kind of a short EP project that I'm going to bring out at the start of the year. I've got an acoustic album of kind of my 10, 11 tunes that are just me and my guitar player, my original guitar player, Charlie Laffer, from the first 2 records. So I've got that I'm going to bring out at some point next year with an EP and another album. So just more music, really. I'm doing a lot of writing at the moment. I've been writing kind of after that period of 2016. I got into writing for other people a lot. So I've been doing a lot of that. So there's always kind of music coming out outside of my own stuff that I'm writing. And yeah, I want to get back on the road. That's it. I need to be back on the road. We just started touring in the States. It was my first, you know, When I Wake Up, it's my first ever time I've toured by myself for my own records in the States. And more in Eastern Europe and mainland Europe a bit more. So yeah, it was just a shame it came at this time. It kind of came at an all right time for me because we just done 2 US tours finishing off in January. So we were going to take a break and come back at the end of this year. So I want to tour. For me, it's about being back on the road and being in front of people and playing in front of people. That's kind of, yeah, that's my most enjoyable part of the whole process. So.
On that note, as we wrap and as we usually do, we have a little closing remark or two. Andy, I'll open it to you. Any closing words?
Oh, just as always, like, Matt, thank you so much for coming on. What an awesome episode. I'm buzzing here. I think, suppose the things I pick up on massively is just like the growth mindset that you have. I think this can transcend into all areas of life. And this is why we do the podcast, because we try and get people on from different demographics and that. But you know, you can see your growth mindset get out of your comfort zone from a very early age. And then the other thing I often talk about is just surround yourself with good people, like, you know, and because people will either do one of two things. They'll either, you know, raise your game or they'll lower your game. And you could have easily sat there with your old management company, you know, safe or whatever. And, you know, I think a lot of people live that way. But once you stepped outside that comfort zone again and surround yourself with the people who can get you to where you want to be, like your team, and that which is so important. And it just seems like you're in a great headspace right now, even throughout all this COVID crack. You just seem full of life. I see your Instagram stories. You're playing music. You're in a good headspace. You're full of energy. I feel that right now. I think a lot of people pick up on that from this podcast. So just genuinely, thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure.
No, thank you for having us on. It's nice to discuss this, like, especially in the similarities when you, like, even just speaking about, you know, my own story, the similarities of you speaking. It's like, yeah, a lot of what we're speaking about is, you know, I suppose can be tied into loads of different things, and it is right. And you know, I've kind of been blessed of having good people around, and you know, they've kept helped keep me kind of settle my mind state. And you know, don't get me wrong, lockdown was a very fucking testing period. Occasions where I could have lost my mind, but yeah, no. So I appreciate it, and lovely to hear your story as always. You know what I mean?
Cool. Well, on that note, this has been your podcast for November, December, give or take.
Depends how long we're in lockdown for.
You'll find all the previous episodes streaming on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, all good platforms. I have been Ken McGuire. That guy in the top corner has been Andy Murphy. Our special guest for this minute, live from London, Maverick Sabre. Thank you so much. Really.
Hey, big love.
We'll be right back.